welcome once again to another edition of Bleeding Edge Interviews. I am your host, Super Dave. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is the show where we dig a little bit deeper into the minds of those who are creating all that wonderful progressive rock and progressive metal that you hear out there, especially on The Expanse, my Live 365 channel. It's a rare and fortunate opportunity that occasionally comes my way that allows me to chat with one of the longest working members of the progressive rock community. It really just allows me to hear the perspectives and experiences of someone who has been there since during the early years of the genre and who is still making vital music today. Really just a cool thing to hear their thoughts. On this occasion, I was lucky enough to get to talk with Hans Lundin, founding and sole remaining original member of Swedish prog rock titans Kaipa. Their 15th album is due out June 28th and is entitled Sommargryningsljus. For those not fluent in Swedish, which includes me, by the way, that means summer dawn light. So as you'll hear shortly, the creation of this album has some really cool stories and some really cool history behind it, and finds Hans and the band still very much at the top of their creative skills. So, without further ado, I present to you my conversation with Hans Lundin of Kaipa. All right. Well, once again, sir, thank you. It's so great to be talking to you, someone with your history and stature in the business and the music field. So nice of you to take some time to talk with me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, looking back, and it's one of those things that it takes a moment. It's amazing to me the longevity, both the band and of yourself. And I got to think it's an unusual treat for me to talk to somebody who's been doing it for so long and who's had a career that's 5-6 decades. And as the new album's coming out, and you look back and you're hitting these milestones of 49 years since the band's debut and 60 years since you've been in the field, I got to wonder, what are your thoughts as you look back over all that time?
Yeah, I can't believe it myself. It's 60 years since I made my first performance in the summer of 1964. I usually say that the years 1964 to 1973 were the best education I could ever get. So when I started Kaipa in 1973, we started from scratch. At that time, no one had heard of the band, and we began a long journey towards success. But it came quickly. For 3 years later, we had recorded 2 albums and became Scandinavia's leading progressive rock band. And we did over 500 concerts, recorded 3 more albums, and continued until 1982. And at that time, the conditions had changed as people showed more interest in punk and synth groups.
Yeah.
So we decided to take a break. However, a reunion never happened, and it wasn't until 2001 when I decided to record a new album. Chapter 2 of Kaipa's history began. But I continued to write music, and during the 80s, I recorded 3 solo albums. In 2019, they were reissued in a 6 CD box called Hans Lundin, The Solo Years. And when I worked to remix and remaster these 3 albums from original tapes, I discovered a lot of unreleased material, also including some Kaipa demos from the Kaipa demos, yes. So there were 3 more extra CDs in the box. And after that, in the 90s, I continued writing music, but it wasn't until 2001 that it resulted in a record when I reformed Kaipa.
That's amazing. It's so unusual to have a band essentially have a break of that long a period. So it's amazing and wonderful that you were able to pull Kaipa back together and bring us more music, because there's
I,
so
I
much
didn't
that it's so great about it.
I didn't think so, because when I uh, collected some of the songs from written in the 90s, I only had the idea to make an album,
Mm.
and I had no plans. I didn't even think of the idea to call it Kaipa. But the fact was that when I wanted a friend, Per Nordin, who had done artwork for the transatlantic albums, and I asked him if he could come up with some idea for a album cover, and I gave him the chance to listen to uh, the demos we had made for this, and he returned immediately to me and said, uh, "This sounds exactly like Kaipa should sound today. So why don't you use the name?" And I talked with Roy and Stolt, who were involved in this and played guitar. And we discussed it and said, okay, maybe that's a good idea. So it that's the story.
Yeah, well, it seems fitting, because it does seem like you picked up where you left off,
Yeah,
and the same level of creativity and musicianship and the same lush sound was carried right on, even to the present day with the newest album. I'm going to try and repronounce it again, because I know I practiced it earlier. Sommargryningsljus.
yeah.
Whether I
Difficult.
can replicate that over and over without concentration, we'll see. um, but yeah, and then I'm interested because I'm digging into the album now, and knowing the inspirations and some of the thoughts you had in and what the album is about. It lines up with some of artists that have been putting out music recently that would really be your contemporaries in many ways, back in the 70s and now, because you're still all creating music, like Peter Gabriel last year with IO, and Steve Hackett and David Gilmour, who have released or have releases coming up this year. And it kind of finds them in this contemplative mood, looking over, the course of their lives, and you know, thinking and musing about mortality and reflecting on lessons learned in a lifetime. How much in this album do you find yourself having similar thoughts, would you say?
I never sit down and try to write music. I usually say that the melodies come knocking on my door and ask me to take care of them.
Yeah.
And that's a very special feeling when a melody comes out of nowhere and lands in my consciousness. Uh, Often it's a long process from the small melody to the finished piece of music. Usually I continue to make small fine adjustments in the arrangements
Mhm.
until it's time to record. And that can be a period of 2 years when I listen and find some more small changes I want to do to find the perfect arrangement. And I never decide in advance how a song should be, because songwriting is an exciting and unpredictable journey. And sometimes it results in just a little excursion, that a small 3 minute songs, but it's unusual on Kaipa albums because often the imagination takes me on a longer, exciting journey, and then it becomes a long song. And this time, I didn't think of writing a concept album. Uh, I had written the songs. It was 70 minutes, uh, and I thought it was a little bit too long, but I thought it was a nice flow in the music. So I decided to have 70 minutes of music on the album. But one day when I was recording with Alina Gibson, something unexpected happened. We just took a break and went out into my garden to have a cup of coffee. And suddenly Alina started singing some notes. And I said, "That's beautiful." And she said, "Okay, let's write a song." So we returned to the studio, and 50 minutes later, we had written a song. And that was actually the first time we wrote a song together, although we've been working for uh, 22 years together. Uh, and Alina is a professional songwriter, but in Kaipa, she is always acting as the female voice. So this was a new experience, and we were both delighted with the result and said that this song must be on the album and the lyrics must be in Swedish. It sounds so Swedish.
Hmm.
And I developed a song and created an interlude built on the same chords in the middle of the songs. And one early morning, a few weeks later, the words suddenly came floating down and landed in my consciousness. And I decided to split the song in two parts. First, Sommargryningsljus, which is about dusk, when the sun goes down, and use it as the opening track of the album. And the second part, Sommargryningsljus, is used as the closing track. I thought it was a good idea that felt logical because several of the songs are about dusk and dawn. And one song, Chased by Wolves and Burned by the Sun, takes place at night when you can't fall asleep. Sometimes I go to and try to sleep, and is some melodies playing in my head, something I'm working with. And sometimes I wish I could step out of the bed and go into the studio and take care of the melodies, but I never do that. But sometimes it can go on for a long time, and that was the inspiration to write this song. And in a way, you can say the album is a journey from dusk to dawn, even though that wasn't my intention when I originally wrote the songs. And with this, when we included these Sommargryningsljus songs, there were 5 minutes more music. And then we were up to 75 minutes. And then Inside Out, our record company, wanted the special single edit mix that I made. They wanted it to be as a bonus track. So now the album is a little bit over 80 minutes. But that's what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No complaints on this end. Actually, pardon me. It threw me off when I first saw that the single edit was actually longer than the album edit, which I thought somebody mislabeled this because single edits are usually cutting parts off. Yet somehow, at least on my track listing, it was coming up as longer, which I thought, well, that's a cool thing. Not many people think in terms of that, but I think if I understood correctly, the single edit, I guess, is it a little closer to the original demo recording or something like that?
Yeah. When we had written the song, I arranged it and included this instrumental part in the middle, and I really liked the song in that way.
Mm.
But then when I decided to split it into two parts, I thought it was a good idea to make this single version so people who are interested could hear the original idea. And that's the complete song.
Very cool. That's so unusual, but that's very cool. And I have to think this concept of, and again, thinking back to those other albums I mentioned, where there is that focus of life from birth to death in a way, but this is talking about the idea more of death to rebirth, if I've got the concept correct here, termed in the metaphor of dusk till dawn. And that's interesting to me because it's a whole different perspective of the idea of that cycle of birth and death and rebirth. And I'm curious to what degree that is reflective of your own beliefs, your own culture.
Uh, I had, like I said, I had no idea about this when I wrote the songs. But of course, it's when you go to sleep, you go away from your consciousness for hours, and when you return, when you wake up, it's every morning is a rebirth. So, in a way, it's correct to say that.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't usually think of it that way, and I'm sure a lot of people don't, but I think that's a very cool idea that, yeah, wherever we go in the course of our dreams, we come back and we're born again in the morning. Nice.
Yeah,
Very nice. Now, I was familiar with the story of the creation of the title track, and I understand songs in the album have some interesting stories behind how they came to be on the album at this time, going back to the 90s.
yeah. That's that's something I haven't used on the other albums. The, the, the 10 albums we have released since Notes from the Past in 2002. But the fact is, when we recorded Notes from the Past, my original idea was to make a double album because I had so many songs written during the 90s. And I discussed it with Roy Stolt, and we came up to the idea to make just a single album. So what happened was I totally forgot about these songs, and for some reason I found a cassette tape a couple of years ago where it was marked Demos 90s, and I started to listen to it, and there was of course some of the songs we had recorded, but also some of the songs that still were familiar after all these years, more than 25 years maybe. Uh, and there were two songs I definitely liked very much. And I thought maybe I could use this. But there was a problem because at that time I only had a program where I could record MIDI files. I couldn't record audio files. So at that time, I had a lot of different synthesizers in the studio, and all was connected with MIDI cables.
Mm.
And so I recorded the songs still only as demos. And then I made a mix and mixed it down on a cassette tape. So that was the only possibility to listen to it with a low sound quality. Uh, and I started thinking about this old Atari computer with a logic notator program. I still had it, so I opened it, started it up, and I found a box with floppy disks, and then I realized that this was MIDI files and nothing else. But for somehow I managed to transfer these files to my modern recording system. And when I opened the files, there was only a name of the instrument and a name or a number of the sound in the catalog on that synthesizer. So maybe they were saying Yamaha TX802, for example. That was one of the old synthesizers I hadn't used for many, many years. And then just a number, for example, 56 cello ensemble. So I had to connect these uh, synthesizers, and suddenly when the signal was sent into the synthesizer, I heard the sound in the best quality. And that was really an experience to hear. Oh, I said, wow, this is sounds good. That really inspired me to work with these songs where I could use these old sounds and combine it with my modern sounds. And one song had another name, but on the album it's called Spiderweb Train. That song was more than 20 minutes long,
Wow.
and I now it's 15 minutes on the album, so it's still a long song. So I have to edit it a bit and cut out some parts, and I also wrote some new bridges, and everything was instrumental. So I decided to take some of the melodies and make them into vocal tracks. I wrote lyrics. And the other track is called Seven Birds, and I really like that title. So I managed to write lyrics keeping the title intact. I thought that I think that the title from the 90s inspired me to write these new lyrics. So I think that's it's interesting because these songs are like making a bridge between the past and today. And that's interesting because it's the 10th album on Inside Out, and I returned to where it's all started around 2000 and include some of that in on the new album. So I like that idea, and I think it turned out great.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's amazing me to think, and I'm someone who was an early adopter as far as computers were concerned. I had them in the mid 90s. I'd already had a computer for about 15 years at that point. So I'm used to them. But when I think back to that time, and I can't say not being a musician, not recording music, I don't know, but it amazes me to think I don't think I quite realized the level of technology we had at that time for recording music, which by today's standards seems primitive almost. And
Yeah,
yet there it was. And for you to be using that at the time almost seems to me like you were already on the cutting edge with a lot of that. So it's kind of amazing to think back to that, and also impressive on your part that you were right there on the leading edge.
I think it's interesting because already in the 80s there were some like an explosion in the synthesizer development. I bought my first synthesizer in 1973, and that was a monophonic, so you could only play one single note. uh, then it was developed, and in 1978, I changed my equipment and used a Prophet 5 that was like in a way, like a minimoog, but you could have 8 voices and you could play chords. And I also bought a Yamaha CS60 synthesizer, and that was after hearing the band UK and their first album uh, in 1978, I think. When I heard it, I said, "Wow, what is this?" that was a sound I never had heard, and so I contacted Yamaha and said if it was possible to get one. They use UK use the big version that's called CS80, and it's heavier than a Hammond organ, over 100 kilos. So uh, uh, today you have the synthesizer in your computer, but
Yeah.
at that time I decided to buy the the, the second version, CS60, and it was really expensive. But the fact is, this synthesizer had one memory, one memory, and a Prophet 5. You could buy a RAM card where you could save up to maybe 50 different sounds. So I was spending a lot of time uh, trying to create my own sounds that was connected with me, with my feelings. When I play, it was connected to my brain, something I really liked.
Yeah.
But there was so much happening. Later, Yamaha came with something called DX7 that was constructed in a completely different way. So everything I have learned was just wasted. You have to start from scratch
No.
again to understand that synthesizer. I still don't think it was logical, but somehow there was new synthesizers coming every year, and I think I spent all my money on uh, buying new equipment, uh, but uh, and spending so much time to do this. You know, just a few years later, you could buy a synthesizer with 500 pre-programmed sounds, and there was some guy sitting in Japan creating sounds. And the fact is, I didn't like most of the sounds. I it was just a lot of blip blip blop blop, more effects. I want the sounds to fit into music the way I'm working.
Right.
So I was happy that I had created my own sounds.
Hmm.
But for some reason, I stopped buying things in the end of the 80s. And today I am satisfied to work with all the basic instruments and sounds from the past and uh, today that I like, and that is forming the sound of the Kaipa keyboards.
Right.
And I think I don't have, I don't need to discover new things because I spent 20 years of my life trying to do that. So today I'm happy to have the sounds that I like and I can use them, and instead concentrating on compositions, arrangements, and how it sounds together with all the other instruments.
Yeah. Yeah. And certainly that, comes across in the music itself, which there's not what I would call a overly technological sound to Kaipa, and especially the new album. It sounds like, honest to goodness, real instruments all the way through. Not produced by computer, and it's just got this very lush, very full sound. It's very impressive. What you've accomplished with the new album. Just
Thank
the
you.
depth of it and the depth of composition, and it kind of leads me to a question that it kind of has become a trend with me, because I'm very curious, especially following the years of the pandemic and all that, how people tend to prefer to do their recording these days. There are artists out there that are geographically spread out, and so they are essentially recording separately and sending files back and forth. There are folks that are still very much wanting to go back to almost a retro way of recording, meaning they're all in the studio together, playing together, which is a bit of a rarity these days. Even when people are in the studio, for the most part, they're often recording their parts separately. So, how does Kaipa work? How do you guys accomplish it?
We have worked since 2000 with recording in different studios. We record. I record all the keyboards. We record all the vocals and flutes and violin, saxophone in my studio. But all the other instruments, guitar, bass, and drums, are they Darby, Per, and Jonas? They have their own studios, and everything is connected and ready. They just have to play. So why should I ask them to travel to Uppsala in Sweden when Darby lives in London and Jonas in Austria? So uh, that's no problem. We have worked like that all the time. But it's interesting because there are other musicians that say Kaipa is not a real band. You don't play live and you don't play together in the studio. So you're not a real band. And I just laugh at that comment. But the
Yeah.
fact is, in 2020, when the pandemic hit the world, uh, all these people had to accept that they should work just like we do, and that was interesting because their albums recorded not when they are in the studio together. It's recorded in different studios and then mixed together.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, but for me it was maybe a revenge because we have done it all the time, and I remember old recordings with Kaipa in the 70s and 80s. There was always a pressure. I could be very maybe I couldn't sleep the night before we should record because I knew that I needed to play exactly all the best in the studio. And that's a pressure that maybe makes me not play as good as I could do. But working like we do today, it means that if I send all the files, I'm always doing a demo where I play everything. I sing all the voices, and then I introduce it to the other musicians. And for example, when I go to Nilsson, our guitar player, in it's 20 miles up north in Sweden, and we listen to it, I know that he can sit and find out. He's try a lot of different ideas and come up with all the best when he plays a solo melody or anything. So why should I ask him to come to my studio and make it in 1 hour? That's no reason because we want to have the best results. And as I'm working with so professional musicians, it's not a problem. It should probably be a problem if someone asked me to do that 60 years ago.
Yeah.
It should probably be very strange.
Yeah. And that's that's funny. With all the times I've talked with people about this kind of thing, it's the first time I can say that I've heard somebody mention the idea of feeling pressure, performance pressure, anxiety, or whatever you want to say about performing in the studio because you've got limited time and you're paying for that time and you can only do or redo things so many times. You're the first person I've ever heard mention that. That's amazing. You must be the most honest of them all because you admit
Yeah,
the anxiety.
yeah, definitely.
That's funny. Never.
I remember when we recorded our first single in 1965. Uh, we listened to the result, and I said, "There's one bass note that is wrong," and the producer said, "Oh, no problem. Nobody can hear that." And there was another band waiting outside the door to get in. You know, uh, so of course, I I think that I am perfectionist. I want everything to be as good as possible.
Right.
So why don't you use all the tools you have to make it that way?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Makes perfect sense to me. And our amazing technology these days gives us the power to do that much more easily. So
Yeah.
one thing too, though, the non-technological part, and this is again one of those things that amazes me, not being a musician or creative in that way, that people like yourself seem able to access this almost bottomless well of creativity. That decades into a career, you're still able to make something new, make something fresh over and over. I wonder, do you have any insight how you're able to do that? I know you said you work really just from inspiration. Does it ever at times get challenging, or do you find you are challenging yourself to find something new? What is that like for you?
Like I said, I never sit down and write something, but once I have a starting point, and the starting point is always a good melody. I'm a melody freak.
Mm,
The more uh, instrumental sections uh, later in the songs, they come from once I start, the inspiration is taking me further and further, and uh, then it starts a process where I get into some more complicated chord structures and melodies, and uh, like I start with a melody, a vocal melody, and it's like in the song on the new album called "Like Thousand Dawns." The first vocal part, Alina sings, and it's in 3/4 time signature. And then a little bit longer into the song, I take over the vocal, and then I have changed the time signature to, I think it's 13/8,
mm,
and it's the same melody, but this what you hear is sounding different. So there is something happening, but the melody is the same, and that's something I often use when I compose. Instead of having 10 different parts in a song, I make different arrangements uh, from the original idea that you can hear in the beginning of the songs. And it can be that I use the same chord structure and compose a completely different melody that is played on a guitar, but it's the same chords as the vocal part. And it also can be for solos and so on. So when you listen to a Kaipa song, you maybe are not aware of it, but you feel it's in a way familiar. It's a story within one song, something you recognize, even if you don't really think of it, because I'm using small parts and make new arrangements in the songs. And I think that's, I think that's interesting. A progressive, uh, progressive rock, you should have uh, many different parts, and you should have many different time signatures. And I'm not so fond of that. I'm more of composing something that where the parts really are connected,
Yeah.
not that you are thrown out into something completely different in the middle of a song. And I remember I wrote a song for our album Children of the Sounds from 2017, and it's called on the Edge of New Horizons. And I don't remember, but it's one of the longest songs.
Hmm.
I can check here. I I I don't remember, but
Yeah.
it's really long. I look here in our On the Edge of New Horizons, 17 minutes and 10 seconds.
Wow.
Uh, and that song is uh, I was working in a complete different direction than what you should do according to the rule book for progressive rock. I decided to try to keep the time signature. I think it's 11/8, which is of course an unusual time signature.
Yes.
And I decided to trying to use this time signature from start to the end, and I managed to do it. And I think that's the only 17 minutes progressive rock song without any time signature changes.
Oh, wow. That, yeah, you've got to be about right. Without the time signature changes, is it still progressive rock?
Yeah,
Very cool. Very cool. And so as we wrap up, so the album's due out like any day now, right?
yeah, 28th of June.
28th. There we go. I
Yeah,
kept looking for a specific date, and somehow or other, I kept missing it. Maybe I was tired last night.
yeah.
But so it's coming out 28th of June. As you look back on the recording process of this album, what would you say is maybe the thing that most will stick in your memory as challenging or memorable? Of course, you've got how the title track "Sommargryningsljus" came into being. That's a great story. I love that inspiration just you right in that moment. Is there anything else you look back and you think this is what is going to be my most memorable takeaway from making this album?
No, I don't think so. I
Okay.
have uh, I can say every time I Per is sending guitar files, and especially his solos. I when I make the demos, I in the beginning when Per started in the band in 2006, I always played a solo and told him, "Can you play something similar to this?" And after a while, I realized I don't have to do that because he's playing. Uh, I have never complained about it and asked him to make another second version or something because he's coming up with such great solos. So in a way, it's when I receive new files, uh, it's like Christmas Eve.
Hmm.
You know, I open up and I say, "Wow, that's great!" Like maybe not at all what I thought when I wrote the song, and and that's I think that's a good thing because if everything is going like I thought it should be, it's much better when someone can comes up with something that is different from my ideas, but at a very good high quality. So uh, that's of course something I remember, and of course working with Darby, it's a very intensive period when he recorded drums, and we Darby, Per, and I are connected on Messenger.
Yeah.
So he plays drums and send a short demo just to see if it's on the right track in ideas how to play and so on. And then he works and sent a file, and mostly there is nothing to complain. It's more I'm so impressed of when I make the demo, I just make basic drums and some fills programmed,
Yeah.
and suddenly there's coming so much life and feelings. Uh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm very happy to have Darby in the band. Uh, his playing is great.
Yeah. Well, yes, absolutely. He's amazing. Bear's amazing. It amazes me in some ways too, just to think that. And it was one of those moments where, looking at the band roster and I see Per Nielsen and I went, wait a minute, name's familiar. And also hit me. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. He's a Meshuggah. That's an entirely different band, entirely different style of music. And
Yeah,
it's a testament to one, his personal versatility as a musician, but two, to the breadth and the depth of what in this day and age can be considered progressive music. And so that's fascinating to me as well.
yeah.
So very nice. All right. So Sommargryningsljus coming out June 28th. I think there's that 3 times now, 4 times I've managed to say the album name with mangling it. So my Swedish is improving.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, congratulations on a wonderful album. Like I said, I've been listening to it and it's come out really, really wonderfully. It's just so full of life and so lush. And I'm impressed. You guys did a great job this time around, and I look forward to everything else you're going to do. So thank you very much for your time. I wish you the best. I hope the album is very, very successful for you guys.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
All righty. Take care. All right. So I promised you some really cool stories, and I do believe Hans delivered quite impressively on that count. And of course, with all the inspiration that he's talking about, all shines through just so brightly on this album. So once again, Sommargryningsljus will be out June 28th. I've included a link to buy it in the description below. And I want to thank the amazing Hans Lundin for chatting with me. Once again, Hans, I wish you and the rest of the band all the best with this album. I hope it's really very successful for you, because it's a fine piece of work and really deserves to be as successful as possible. And a big thank you to everyone else out there listening. I just want to thank you all for your time and appreciate you following along. If you'd like to follow me in social media a little bit, the links are also in the description. And check out my progressive rock and metal station on Live 365 if you get a chance. It's called The Expanse, and it's all prog rock and metal all day. And on Sundays, we do a fun little thing called Brain Salad Sunday, where it's all classic and deep-cut progressive rock from the 60s and 70s. Really very cool. So that's all I have for you now. As always, never be afraid to deviate from the norm. Keep it proggy. And this is Super Dave signing off.